The call came in at 3:07 a.m. A female voice, trembling, barely audible. "I think my husband is dead." That was all she said. No screaming. No panic. Just a cold, eerie calm. Detective Michael Reyes was already awake when the call came through. His mind had been restless for days, but now, something in that voice, the simplicity of it, jolted him awake in a way he couldn't quite explain. He grabbed his coat and headed out the door. The scene was a luxury apartment in one of the tallest buildings in the city, Madison Heights. It was an exclusive area. Young professionals, high society couples, people who never imagined something like this happening in their pristine lives. When the paramedics arrived, they found the door to apartment 213 unlocked. The lobby guard had already let them in, but there was something off about the whole situation. The apartment was eerily still. Inside, they found Adrian Mallory, 38, lying motionless on the bed. His eyes were wide open, his face frozen in what appeared to be a moment of sheer terror. The strangest thing? There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, just the hollow emptiness of the room. He was dead. His wife, Evelyn Mallory, sat on the edge of the bed. Her fingers rested on Adrian's cold chest. She didn't cry. She didn't speak much either. She just stared at the mirror across the room, her face unreadable. The scene felt off. Reyes was experienced, but something about this wasn't sitting right. It wasn't the body that unnerved him, it was the room. The air was too still. Too perfect. The lighting was dimmed just right, casting shadows that seemed to hold something dark, something hidden. But it wasn't just the ambience that bothered him. It was the mirror. There it was, hanging on the opposite wall from the bed. A large, antique mirror with a thick, ornate frame. Too perfect to be just a decoration. Too cold to be ignored. Reyes didn't move for a moment, just stared at it. The more he looked, the more it seemed to loom larger in the room. He stepped closer to inspect it. That's when he saw it, fingerprints. But not just any fingerprints. They were smeared, as though someone had pressed their hands against the glass from the inside. No one had touched the mirror. No one alive. "Did you see this?" Reyes asked, his voice low. A nearby officer nodded, but he could see that the others had missed the subtlety. They were focused on the body, not the room. Reyes was starting to wonder if they were missing something bigger. "Take a closer look at the frame," he said, turning back to Evelyn. She was still sitting motionless by the bed, almost as if she hadn't even noticed him. Her gaze remained fixed on the mirror. Something was wrong here. Reyes could feel it in his bones. The lab later confirmed that the fingerprints weren't just smudges, they were fresh. The mirror had been tampered with recently, but not by anyone who was still breathing. As Reyes dug deeper, he learned that Adrian Mallory had been seeing a psychologist. The psychologist reported that Adrian had been experiencing severe paranoia in the weeks leading up to his death. He had begun to believe that someone, or something, was watching him. His fear was escalating, and yet, Evelyn had dismissed it as stress from his job. "He's just tired," she'd said. "He works too hard. He needs rest." But now, after seeing what he had, Reyes was beginning to wonder if Adrian had been right. If he'd really been watched. The mirror, it seemed, was more than just a reflection. It was a symbol, something Adrian had been trying to understand, but couldn't. And that tiny hole in the wall behind it? The one that no one seemed to notice? Reyes ordered it to be inspected. The hole was small, just big enough to hide a camera or a microphone. It was a microphone. Someone had been listening. Flashback, 2 weeks earlier. Adrian Mallory had begun to act strangely. It started with minor quirks. He'd forget appointments, lose track of time, but then it grew more intense. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, eyes wide open, whispering to himself. He began writing in a journal, furiously. His handwriting was erratic, as if he was trying to outrun his thoughts. "I see him in the reflection," one of the journal entries read. "I don't know who he is, but he mimics me. He smiles when I'm not. He watches me sleep. Evelyn says it's nothing, but I know that mirror isn't empty." The more Evelyn tried to dismiss it, the more Adrian withdrew. But he wasn't just paranoid. He was terrified. He became obsessed with the mirror. He thought it was somehow connected to his fear. And then there were the late-night phone calls, the ones that Evelyn said were from an unknown number. Every night at 2 a.m., without fail. Adrian would pick up the phone, listen for a few seconds, then hang up without saying a word. He never told her who was on the other end of the line. But that was all before the night he died. The lab results came back just hours after the body was removed. They confirmed what Reyes had already suspected. The fingerprints on the mirror were fresh, but the mirror itself had been untouched by anyone alive. The tiny hole behind the mirror? It was a hidden microphone, and it had been carefully installed in a way that no one could notice, until now. But the most disturbing part? The SD card. The technician, Ella Jennings, had found it buried beneath the padding inside the mirror's frame. A single file, timestamped 2:11 a.m., just 1 hour before Evelyn had made the fateful call. Reyes knew he had to see it. He leaned over the technician's desk as Ella played the video. It was grainy, black and white. The footage was taken from the mirror's angle, and at first, it looked like any ordinary bedroom scene. Adrian was asleep, his face relaxed, a slight snore escaping his lips. Evelyn, however, was not asleep. She walked into the room slowly, her silhouette faint against the dim light from the bedside lamp. She didn't look at Adrian. Instead, she walked straight to the mirror, standing just a few inches from the glass, as though waiting for something. She stood there for nearly 2 minutes, motionless, staring into the reflection as if lost in thought. Her hand twitched at her side, as though she wanted to reach out, but didn't. Then she turned, walked over to the bed, and placed something small under Adrian's pillow. The camera angle, however, was too obscure to make out what she had left behind. The video cut off. "Is that it?" Reyes asked. Ella nodded. "That's all we have. No sounds, no movement, just her staring at herself in the mirror." Reyes paused, thinking. He ran the footage again, but no matter how many times he watched, it didn't make sense. Something felt off. Why had Evelyn acted so calm after finding Adrian dead? Why had she waited for so long to call 911? And why had she gone to the mirror first? There had to be more to this. Flashback, 1 week earlier. The weeks leading up to Adrian's death were filled with increasing tension in the Mallory household. His paranoia grew more intense by the day. The once peaceful, seemingly perfect couple had been on edge. Evelyn, normally so collected, was now irritable, defensive. Adrian's behavior had shifted from subtle to erratic. At first, Evelyn chalked it up to stress, but Adrian became convinced that someone, or something, was in the room with him when he slept. He had told her the story one evening over dinner, his voice trembling as he described the figure that appeared in his dreams. He said it was a man, always dressed in black, but with no face. The man stood by the bed, just inches away from him. But it wasn't a dream, Adrian insisted. "He's real," he had said. "I can feel him breathing. Watching me." Evelyn dismissed it as another symptom of stress. She didn't understand how to help him. But Adrian had stopped sleeping altogether, staying awake for days at a time. He was losing grip on reality, spiraling further into his fears. But Evelyn couldn't leave. She couldn't abandon her husband, not even when his terror began to bleed into their everyday life. They'd been married for 8 years, and Evelyn couldn't imagine living without him. But as Adrian's grip on reality slipped further, she became more desperate, more distant. And when he began speaking about the mirror, about how it seemed to watch him, how it whispered when no one was around, she began to worry that her husband had finally snapped. Yet Evelyn couldn't bring herself to tell anyone. It wasn't just the shame of what he was going through, it was the fear of what it might mean for their family. She couldn't let anyone know that her husband was unraveling. She couldn't let anyone see what had become of the perfect life they'd built. Present day. Reyes' mind raced as he thought back to the footage. He needed answers. There was one person who might know something more about the Mallory's life, their closest friend, someone who had been there through the early years of their marriage. That person was Julia Avery, Adrian's best friend from college and Evelyn's confidant. Reyes needed to speak with her. She had been at their apartment just 2 days before Adrian died. She had been the last person to see him alive. The next morning, Reyes met Julia at a cafe in downtown Manhattan. She looked tired, anxious, but determined to talk. Detective, I don't know what to tell you, Julia began. Adrian, he was always a bit intense, but lately? He'd been talking about this shadow, this figure that he said followed him around. I told him he needed help. I told Evelyn to take him to a therapist, but she kept saying he was fine. Everything's fine. Julia's voice trailed off, and she looked down, nervously twisting her coffee cup. Reyes leaned forward, sensing there was more to the story. Did he ever mention the mirror? He asked. Julia froze. Her eyes flickered, and for the first time, she looked uncertain. The mirror, she repeated, as if trying to process the question. Yeah, Reyes said. Did he ever mention it? Julia's face went pale. She leaned in close. Evelyn, she bought that mirror. She said it was a gift, something to decorate the apartment. But Adrian hated it from the start. He said it made him feel like he wasn't alone in the room. It made him feel watched. Rhea's mind began to race. This mirror was connected to everything. To Adrian's fear. To Evelyn's strange behavior. To the fingerprints. But now there was one question on his mind. Was Evelyn involved? The more Reyes learned about the Mallory family, the less certain he was about Evelyn's involvement in Adrian's death. On the surface, everything pointed to her. Her odd calmness after finding him, the footage of her standing at the mirror, the strange behavior surrounding the mirror itself. But as he dug deeper, a darker, more twisted picture began to form. Evelyn's unease had only deepened after Julia Avery's revelation about the mirror. Reyes couldn't stop thinking about the look on Julia's face when she mentioned it, the fear, the hesitation. It wasn't just that Adrian had been obsessed with the mirror. No, something far more sinister was at play here. Reyes went back to the apartment, determined to search for anything that might reveal the truth. As he entered room 213 again, he felt a chill. The mirror was still there, still hanging on the wall in the same place, the reflection of the room distorted slightly by the worn glass. He walked toward it, his gaze never leaving the frame. The mirror had now become the focal point of everything that had happened, the source of Adrian's fear, and now, the source of his death. Reyes ran his fingers along the edges, tracing the ornate carvings of the frame. He looked for any clues, any marks, anything that might suggest how the mirror had been tampered with. That's when he noticed something unusual. A faint, almost imperceptible scratch on the surface of the glass, as if someone had scraped it recently. His heart skipped a beat. He pressed his face close to the mirror, examining it more carefully, and that's when it hit him. There, just barely visible, was an engraving, a set of initials etched into the glass, hidden beneath the grime. M. Evelyn Mallory. For what and how? Reyes pulled away from the mirror, a feeling of dread washing over him. The more he uncovered, the more the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit together, pieces that didn't belong to a grieving wife. This was something else entirely. Evelyn Mallory had lied. She had to have lied. There was no other explanation for this. Adrian's paranoia, the mirror, the strange behavior, it all led back to her. But what was her connection to the mirror? And why had she gone to such lengths to conceal the truth? Flashback, 1 year earlier. Adrian Mallory had always been a logical man. He'd been a successful lawyer, the kind of person who prided himself on reason and control. But when he and Evelyn had moved into their new apartment, something changed. It had been a significant purchase, one they'd worked hard for. The apartment was everything they had dreamed of, modern, spacious, with sweeping views of the city skyline. But there was one thing Adrian couldn't shake, the feeling that the apartment, specifically their bedroom, was wrong. It was Evelyn who had insisted on the antique mirror. She had found it at a local estate sale, an elaborate piece that matched the decor of their bedroom. Adrian hadn't liked it from the moment it was hung. It felt out of place, as if it didn't belong there. He'd asked Evelyn to take it down, but she refused. She said it added character to the room. She said it brought warmth. But Adrian's unease only grew. One night, shortly after the mirror was installed, Adrian woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his heart racing. He could have sworn he had seen something in the reflection, something that wasn't supposed to be there. It was just a fleeting glimpse, a shadow moving behind him, but it was enough to send him into a panic. From that moment on, Adrian began having nightmares. He would wake up in the early hours of the morning, screaming, his body trembling, convinced that something was watching him through the mirror. At first, Evelyn had brushed it off. She thought it was stress. But as the days passed, Adrian's fear grew stronger, more tangible. Then one night, it happened. Adrian woke to find his reflection in the mirror, standing behind him, looking at him, smiling. But it wasn't Adrian's smile. It was something else entirely, something twisted, something dark. He couldn't escape the feeling that the mirror was a portal, something that connected him to a world he couldn't understand. Present day. Reyes knew that something had to give. He couldn't ignore the mounting evidence any longer. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that Evelyn wasn't the only one who had a connection to the mirror. He needed to know more about her past, her life before Adrian. What had shaped her? What had brought her to this point? Reyes reached out to her family and found something curious: Evelyn's childhood. She had grown up in a small town in upstate New York, a quiet place where everyone knew each other. But Evelyn wasn't like the other children. She had always been a bit different. Her parents, both psychologists, had always been distant, more interested in their work than in their daughter. Evelyn had spent most of her childhood in isolation, living in a house that felt like a cold, clinical space. It wasn't until she met Adrian in college that things began to change. She had never been good at forming relationships, but Adrian had been different. He was kind, patient, and he seemed to understand her in a way no one else ever had. But there was one thing Evelyn kept hidden from Adrian: her fascination with the supernatural. It started with small things: reading books about paranormal activity, researching ancient rituals. But as she grew older, her obsession deepened. She began collecting items she believed had special properties, artifacts that, in her mind, held the power to connect her to another realm. The mirror had been the last of her collection. She had found it in an old antique shop while Adrian was away on a business trip. It was said to be centuries old, a piece of history with a dark reputation. Some believed it had once belonged to a family that had vanished mysteriously, leaving nothing behind but their belongings. Evelyn had been drawn to it, and when she brought it home, things began to change. Reyes sat back in his chair, stunned. Evelyn's obsession with the mirror was no coincidence. She had known exactly what she was doing when she brought it into their home. She had known about the mirror's dark past. But what? Why had she chosen to embrace the darkness? Detective Reyes stood in the Mallory apartment, his mind racing as he pieced together everything he had uncovered. The mirror, Evelyn's obsession with the supernatural, Adrian's deteriorating sanity, the initials carved into the glass. All the evidence pointed toward one terrifying conclusion: Evelyn had known exactly what she was doing when she brought the mirror into their lives. But what had driven her to take such drastic actions? Reyes now had one final question. Was Evelyn the victim of something far darker than she realized, or had she orchestrated the entire thing? His phone buzzed. It was Julia Avery, Adrian's best friend. Reyes had reached out to her earlier, but he hadn't expected her to respond so quickly. "Detective, I need to talk to you. It's about the mirror." Reyes felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew Julia had more to say, and whatever it was going to change everything. Flashback, 1 year earlier. Evelyn had always been drawn to the eerie, the unknown. While Adrian was grounded in logic and reason, Evelyn found herself searching for something deeper. She had always been intrigued by stories of the paranormal, of objects that held strange powers, and it wasn't long before she became obsessed with finding artifacts that might connect her to another world. When she first encountered the mirror, it had called to her. She had seen it in an old antique shop, covered in dust and hidden away from the other items. The dealer had told her it was a relic from a family that had disappeared decades earlier. But there was more to it than just the history. The mirror had an aura about it, something dark, something that beckoned her closer. She didn't tell Adrian about the mirror at first. He would never understand. Instead, she placed it in their bedroom, admiring its intricate design and feeling a strange connection to it. As she spent more time with the mirror, her dreams grew more vivid, more intense. She began to hear whispers late at night, voices calling her name, urging her to look deeper. One night, the whispers became clear. They spoke of a ritual, a way to unlock the true power of the mirror, to open a doorway to another realm. The ritual promised to grant its practitioner unimaginable power, but at a cost. The mirror would demand a sacrifice. Evelyn hesitated at first, but her curiosity overcame her. She had always felt incomplete, as though something was missing in her life. The mirror was her answer, her way to feel whole again. She performed the ritual alone, in the dead of night, while Adrian slept soundly beside her. At first, nothing happened. But as the weeks passed, Adrian began to change. He became paranoid, withdrawn, convinced that the mirror was watching him. It wasn't long before he started seeing things, shadows moving in the reflection, strange figures appearing when he looked into it. Evelyn's world, once filled with hope, began to crumble. Adrian's sanity deteriorated, and she could do nothing but watch as the man she had once loved became a shell of himself. The ritual had worked. The mirror had unlocked something, but it had taken a toll on Adrian's mind. And then the worst thing happened. Adrian found out what she had done. He discovered the ritual, the sacrifices, and the truth behind the mirror. But it was too late. He was already too far gone. Present day. Reyes met Julia at a small cafe, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. She hadn't said much when they spoke over the phone, but Reyes could tell that she knew something crucial. "Detective," Julia began, her voice trembling. "There's something I need to tell you. Something Evelyn never told you." Reyes leaned forward, his instincts telling him this was the key. "What is it?" Julia took a deep breath. "I knew about the mirror. Adrian had come to me a few weeks before his death. He was terrified, convinced that something was inside it. He said it wasn't just a mirror, it was a portal. He said Evelyn had done something dark. He was afraid of what she had become." Reyes felt a wave of realization wash over him. "So, you think Evelyn?" Julia nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Evelyn was trying to control something she didn't understand. She thought she could handle it. But Adrian was different. He was smart and he figured it out. He confronted her. That's when things started getting really bad. Reyes stood up abruptly. "Where is she now?" Evelyn Mallory sat in her apartment, staring at the mirror in the bedroom. She hadn't moved in hours, her gaze fixed on the glass. The reflection stared back at her, a pale imitation of the room behind her. But she knew something was wrong. The mirror wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was alive. And it had begun to change. Her heart raced as she heard the whispers again, louder this time. The voices called to her, promising her power, urging her to finish what she had started. She had tried to resist. She had told herself that the ritual would be enough, that she could control the forces she had awakened. But it had been too much. Adrian had known. And now, the mirror wanted more. Evelyn's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. She froze. The last person she wanted to see was standing on the other side of that door. She didn't move. Then, the whispering grew louder, almost unbearable. The mirror seemed to pulse, its reflection flickering as if alive. Evelyn closed her eyes, trying to block out the voices. She knew what she had to do. She had to finish it. She had to make the sacrifice. Reyes stood outside the door, his hand poised to knock. Something didn't feel right. He could sense it. The air was thick, heavy with anticipation. He had to confront Evelyn. The pieces were all in place. But the truth was darker than he had ever imagined. As he raised his hand to knock, he heard a scream, a chilling, unnatural sound that made his blood run cold. It was Evelyn. Without hesitation, Reyes forced the door open. The sight that greeted him would haunt him forever. Evelyn was standing before the mirror, her body trembling, her eyes wide with fear. Her reflection was no longer her own. In the glass, a twisted, faceless figure stood beside her, its hand reaching out as if to claim her. But it wasn't just her reflection anymore. The mirror had crossed the line. The shadow had come to life. Reyes rushed forward, but before he could reach her, the mirror shattered. The glass exploded outward, and everything went black.